So for the next 40 minutes or so, what I wanted to do was go through the results off of our field scale cereal fungicide program that we've been running since 2008. And basically a brief agenda of how I'm going to run through it. I'll start off with a brief description as far as what we're doing with our trialing program, how we set the trials up, and how we manage them, and kind of the results we have. And then right after that, I'll dive into all the results that we have in both in oats, barley, and wheat. I'm really going to focus lots on the yield end of things, because that's usually the main question that we get from guys, is with regards to, how many bushels per acre are these fungicides giving us. But I also got a fair amount of data with regards to the quality end of things, like grade, bushel weight, FDK, dawn reduction, stuff like that. And then even the last couple of years, we've really started to key in a little bit more and dive into a little bit more on this whole return on investment. And as we keep getting those questions like, do fungicides pay? When do they pay? How much do they pay off? And we tried to incorporate it into here with some of the results. And I'll talk about that a little bit more as we go through. So how do we do these trials? Like I said, we started these in 2008. And we were kind of sitting around the boardroom table one day, and we said, well, we identified that there was a gap in terms of the data that was out there with regards to performance of fungicides. And we said, how are we going to try and address that gap and get some data out there? And when we looked internally at the model that we had with regards to our Invigor strip trialing program, or demonstration strip trials, we said that model is working very well for us in terms of the results that we're getting and the credibility of the data. So we tried to basically extrapolate that model and move it over into cereal fungicides. So like I said, we've been doing this in wheat, barley, and oats. The majority of our data, and I'll show you in a second, is in wheat. But we wanted to utilize a replicated strip trial program design to try and minimize any other effects that we're seeing. So if you look down into the bottom right down in here, this is a typical trial design that we have. We'll pull into a commercial field, a guy he's sprayed and seeded and fertilized the field accordingly, and we just kind of pull in at flag leaf timing and start fogging the fungicide on. We use a replicated trial design to try and ensure that the land is not throwing any adverse effect into us. So if you say, like, we'll do a whole bunch of strips right here, and then on this side right here, we'll do a mirror image of it, and then we can run the stats on it to ensure that we're not seeing any land variability that's influencing the results. Primary goal, what we started on this was to basically to look at the yield, the quality and the quantity of the grain yield coming in. And then secondary, after the fact, was looking at different treatments, different products, different timings, how we stack up against the competitors, all that sort of stuff. They are commercial size. This is, for example, right up here, this is the spray rig that I use. It's a 3-point hitch. It's a 42-foot boom that we use. Some of the newer sprayers that we got, we're getting a 48-foot boom. And we're basically doing one sprayer width by 500 feet absolute minimum to try and get us into that commercial size scenario. And then at the end of the year, we'll throw it through a combine and get the results. So we're trying to get about as true to life under commercial real life conditions as what we can get. And I think we've been fairly successful with this design. Here's an example of one my counterpart in Northern Alberta had a couple years ago, a little bit of an aerial shot, and you can actually see some of the different treatments and some of the effects that we're seeing here. Looks like he kind of sprayed his way out of the field right here. I don't know what he was doing, but as I go through the presentation, I'll talk lots with regards to a T2 and a T3 timing. T2 is kind of an internal term that we use with regards to a reference to the flag leaf timing, and the T3 timing is what we refer to as our head timing. And by that I mean is when that first flower is poking out on the wheat head is kind of our optimal wheat head timing. As I go through analysis, we'll talk about yield, grade, bushel weight, like I said, some of the FDKs, the dawns, the protein, some of the quality parameters as well. And then the other thing is, as our database has gotten to a substantial enough size, we're able to start to slice and dice the database and really start to dive into and start to pick out trends. And we've started to look at, low disease versus high disease trials, dry versus moist weather patterns, and then as well, like I said, the return on investment. So this is what we've been up to over the 6 years we've been doing it. 6 years of field scale trials, 107 trials, nicely spread across the West. And you can see obviously right here, the big chunk of it is in the hard red springs, but we do have some hits in winter and the softs and Durhams. 35 hits on barley and 19 oat trials. So It's a very, very large database, and it's actually one that I'm very proud to say that there is no one else in the industry today that has a database of this size and of this magnitude that is in a replicated strip tile program. There's lots of other trial programs that are out there. A lot of them are primarily side-by-side based. But like I said, I'm very proud to say that there is no one else in the industry that has a data set like this. So, diving into the results. I got a little bit of data on oats, and we'll talk a little bit more on barley, but I'll spend the majority of my time on wheat. This is what we've been seeing in oats. So 14 trials over the last 5 years, looking at the 3/4 rate of follicule sprayed at flag leaf timing. And we're seeing an average about just over a 7 bushel per acre response with this product at this timing. And this has actually been a fairly consistent trend as I roll up the data from over the last couple of years, from 4, 5, and 6 years. It's been very consistent in terms of this 7 bushel response. We have seen a little bit of difference with regards to the genetics that we're using in the field, and some of the varieties out there that have some stronger crown rust resistance packages, for example, we're maybe not seeing as much of a response. We're still kind of getting in that 2, 3, 4 bushel per acre response, but for some of the genetics where we have weak crown rust resistance packages, we're seeing responses that are into that 10, 11, 12 response and that. When we looked at the quality end of things, not much of a story there. We were seeing a little bit of grade response, or we're getting a little bit better grades in some cases. A little bit of a jump in the drop in percent thins, but for the most part, the quality end of things was staying fairly stable, going from treated to untreated. And that's really all that I want to say on oats. So I'll switch gears. Got a few slides on barley here now. 26 trials over the last 6 years where we've had the full rate of follicule at flag leaf, and then also with the Prezzero at the head timing as well too. And there's the response that we've seen there. And once again, this trend in terms of what we've seen with these two products in a side-by-side comparison, this trend has stayed fairly stable over the last couple of years. We also, I didn't include it in here, but we've also looked at the 3/4 rate of follicule at the flag leaf time. And if I was to put it on this graph, it would probably end up, well, let me turn this on. It would probably end up somewhere around that 5 bushel per acre response. We tend to see that as we move from the 3/4 rate to the full rate of follicule, we do tend to see a dose response at that flag leaf timing. So corporately, we're very comfortable. We're saying that with regards to the full rate at flag leaf timing, that'll be kind of the main product that we're recommending at that time. In terms of the competitors, when we start looking at how we stack up against the competition out there, one of the big competitors that we face on a daily basis is Carumba from BASF. And you can see where the results stack out here. A little bit of a less response with Carumba in barley than in wheat, and I'll show you the wheat results here in a little bit. And this has again been a fairly stable trend over the last number of years. We see the numbers kind of jockey up around a little bit. They move kind of like 0.2, 0.3, it seems like every year. But again, this has been a fairly stable trend in terms of performance. When we look at the barley end of things, in terms of the grade, we separated out, this is individual product comparisons versus the untreated. So in the case of, say, down in the bottom here, we've got 32 times where we compared Prezzero against an untreated, and 16% of those times we were able to achieve a better grade. And that's moving basically from a number 3 to a number 2, from a number 2 to a number 1, basis the disease pressure and the grading specs that come through on the elevators. So. Looking at the bushel weight end of things, a little bit more of a positive story there, and we're seeing, as we get 20 hits on the 3/4 rate, 28 on the full rate at flag leaf, 31 hits of Prezzero at the full time. You can see, especially with Prezzero at that head timing, we're just shy of 60% of the time we're seeing at least a pound per bushel gain in the bushel weight. And that's like, say, moving it from a 49 to a 50 pound per bushel, or 51 to 52. And then even if we kind of stretch it out a little bit, where we start looking at times where we try to gain at least 2 pounds per bushel, moving it from 48 to 50 or so on, we're still seeing that those flag leaf timings, we're still getting some of it with the flag leaf timings, but if we're looking for those kind of big gains on the bushel weight front, the Prezzero at that head timing seems to be by far our best option for gaining bushel weight. Switching gears to wheat, and this is, I mentioned before, we're going to be talking a little bit with regards to return on investment. This slide right here, and you guys will have it in your books, this is kind of how we factored and how we came about looking at this whole return on investment. So we tried to simplify it a little bit, and because this is something where you can really get into the weeds in terms of, trying to figure out, does this stuff pay, does it not pay? So for the purposes of this presentation, we're solely looking at it from the yield end of things. We're not trying to factor in that quality or grade improvement, trying to move, with this treatment we move from a number 2 to a number 1, so therefore we get a better price at the elevator. This solely focuses on the yield end of things. We kind of took the stick and kind of dropped it where we thought would be somewhat realistic. We're using basically a wheat price of $6.50 per bushel. We use a fungicide cost that's suggested retail price, not including any of the programming that's out there. And then we use an application cost of $5 per acre. And we know that custom app charges can be a little bit higher. Guys with their own rigs, their costs are going to be a little bit lower. So we kind of figured that $5 was probably, in the ballpark. So basis kind of all of those numbers, we're finding that, for guys spraying the 3/4 rate of foliar, they basically need about 2.3 bushel per acre yield increase to pay for itself. For the full rate of foliar, either at flag leaf or at head timing, they need, just shy of 3 bushels per acre. And with Prezero, we're looking, about 3.5 bushels per acre is what we need for this product to break even. And as we go through, to try and simplify it again a little bit, I use just background colors. So obviously a red background, we're losing money. If it's a yellow background, we're breaking even. If it's a green background, that's a situation where we're seeing the guys using fungicides as making money. Like I said, we tried to keep this as fairly general as possible, and there's lots of different little twists and ways we can look at this. If you guys want to dive into this a little bit more, I'd strongly encourage you to talk to your sales rep, talk to your market development person. It's a fairly simple calculation that you can dive into. Okay. So what have we seen over 6 years? If you look at this is the numbers here, this is the gain in bushels per acre versus the untreated check on a per product basis, and broken down by year, 2008 right through 2013, and then our overall 6-year averages. And there's a couple trends that I want to poke out here. First off, let's look at the background colors. So we can see here, the flag leaf treatments in 09, one of the drier years there, we had tended to see a little bit less response here. So from a return on investment standpoint, not as favorable of a situation. But in terms of when you start looking overall throughout the years, and especially when you start looking at the 6-year averages here over on the right, pretty much right across the board, we are seeing a very positive return on investment. So in general, guys are making money with these things. But even when you look on a year-to-year basis, you look at some of the dry years like 2008, 2009, we're still seeing some fungicide response here that's, it's making its pay for itself and putting money in the guys' pockets. You look at some of the wetter years like 2010, 2011, we're getting like, an extra 12 bushels per acre versus the untreated check with some of these products. Like we're seeing some pretty good trends. 2013 more so kind of falls in line with the averages, but overall, if we look right across the board over 6 years, it's very, very much a strong return on investment. So for the guys that are using this technology, they're seeing it, they're allowing themselves to keep the bushels in the bin, in the combine, in the bin, and reaping the rewards of it. Now, when I took the database and broke it down by prairies or by different sections within the prairie, when I started back in 2008, the kind of general trend or the general consensus was that if you wanted fungicide yield data, go to Manitoba. They've got all the disease pressure, they've got the humidity, blah, 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 all that sort of stuff. But when I started to separate this out, this was, I guess, a little bit of a surprise, but not quite a surprise. And if I started looking at Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, we're seeing these products perform right across the West. And further to that point, if you start looking at the consistency of these products across the West, if you look like 4.8 to 4.2 to 4.9, 7.6, 5.85, like it's a very consistent number all the way across the West. So I know we've got Manitoba's the heart of fusarium and all that, but when someone from Alberta says we don't have disease pressure there, I look at these numbers and I kind of go, I think you do. And I know for you guys in Saskatchewan here, I know you'd like a little Grey Cup symbol right here just in lieu of recent events, but I just went with that. But this was something, and again, these numbers haven't varied all that much in the years that, over the last 3, 4, 5 years that I've separated these numbers out. Very consistent trend right across the board. When we start looking at how some of these products compare and how some of these timings compare, 66 trials dating back to 2008, where we've had the 3/4 rate of Folicure at the flag leaf, we've had Folicure here at head timing, and then we've had Preserva over here at head timing. You can see that little bit of a step ladder in performance going through. And as I've looked at this comparison over the last number of years, it's a very stable trend. We see, we're seeing a very good positive response right here. We're seeing, as we move into the head timing, a little bit of a bump in performance here with Folicure, and then Preserva at the head timing kind of leading the way. We also have looked at the full rate of Folicure at flag leaf timing as well too, in comparison to the 3/4. And we did see a little bit of a bump in performance versus the 3/4 rate, but the bump in yield performance with regards to the extra product costs, it's kind of a wash. So that's why we're at this stage, we're fairly comfortable with recommending the 3/4 rate at the flag leaf time. Now, the other thing is that kind of factors into this is what kind of disease pressure we're seeing in these trials. So we started this in 2009, where every time a market development person like myself or Dan or Trevor, when we wander into a trial to go spray it, we'll walk into the untreated section or strip that we leave, and then we'll rate it on a simple 1 to 9 scale for the disease pressure that's in there. So we'll look at the lower leaves, we'll look at the middle leaves, we'll look at the upper leaves, and give it an assessment at the time of application. We'll do that when we do the flag leaf applications, we'll do that when we do the head timing applications, and then anywhere in kind of like that 10 to 14 days after the head timing, we'll come back and do kind of like a post-assessment as well too. And just to explain a little bit about the scale, a rating of a 1, 2, 3, you can see, even if you look at the picture on the bottom here, there's not much. There's basically, the plants are very green. We're seeing maybe a little bit of noise down in the bottom part of the canopy, some of the bottom leaves, but for the most part, it's a very clean plant. As we start to get into this medium stage right here, we're starting to see that the bottom leaves have got a fair amount of lesions on them, potentially already starting to really dry up and senesce. Those mid leaves are getting some fairly good pressure, and we're also starting to see a few spots showing up on that flag leaf. It's not an epidemic on the flag leaf, but it's kind of like the indicator that stuff is moving up the plant, and we're starting to see the first little effects on the flag leaf. And obviously, when we get over into the high scenarios here, that's where your flag leaf is just riddled with disease, and the whole plant is looking quite ugly. So when I started to separate how these products compare to the untreated basis of the disease level in the trial, there's a couple trends that kind of poke out. First off is, in this first column here, 0 to low leaf disease pressure at application. And then when I look at these numbers right here, we're averaging 4.2, 4.6, 3.5, 6 bushel per acre better than the untreated check. This was a little bit of a surprise to me, because here is a plant that's not showing much in terms of disease pressure from a visual standpoint, yet we're still seeing a positive yield response, and especially if I look at the background color here, it's very much a positive return on investment for a guy that sprays it. And this was an interesting observation, because as a producer, when he's looking at his plant, he's looking at it, this is green. Why should I be spraying fungicide on a green plant that's got very little disease pressure? And this kind of backs up the fact that, as we put those fungicides on in a protective fashion, it's still providing a very good return on investment for these guys in the end. Obviously, as we move into that medium leaf disease pressure at application, you can see the numbers kind of pop up accordingly, and we're getting more of a response out of the fungicides. Understandable, the disease, we can see it, it's there, and the fungicides are going to work, a little bit more from a curative standpoint than the protective, but we're still seeing that response. The other trend that I picked out here was the difference between the flag leaf and the head timings. And if you look at the difference from that low pressure to the medium pressure, we are seeing, we're moving up about 1.5 bushels on with the 3/4 rate Folicure here. We're moving up here about 2 bushels with the full rate. But when we move to those head timings, we're seeing the jump increase a little bit more, where we're getting up to about a 3.3, 3.5 increase in performance between these two aspects. So we're seeing that, yeah, there is that, everything's kind of moving up, but we're seeing those head timing products move up just a little bit better when some of that disease pressure snakes up a little bit higher. We also wanted to separate trials out basis moisture. So every year, about mid-September or so, I'll hop onto the Drought Watch website and pull off these maps, send it across to the guys, and then they'll basically plot their trials in accordingly. And we look at this through the whole growing season. So we'll look at basically from the start of April right through to the start of September. It's kind of encompassing the whole growing season. And we look at it as a percent of kind of average precipitation for each respective area. The reason we were looking at the whole area, or the whole growing season, is that when we started to try and separate trials basis the moisture level up to the point of application. So here's a producer, he's got a dry scenario, he's trying to decide whether to spray flag leaves. We decided to look at the whole year because even if it's, say, dry up to the point of application, if it turns wet in the weeks afterwards, we could potentially still see, you know, a disease manifestation and, you know, the whole disease triangle thing coming into effect. So that's why we try to use the whole season to get us a little bit of a bigger picture with regards to what kind of moisture conditions these trials are sitting in. So then went back, separated each of these individual treatments out, again in comparison to the untreated and how they stack up. So as you would expect, you know, when we start getting into some of those dry scenarios, like where we're less than 85% of normal precipitation for that area for the year, we are seeing, you know, not as much of a response as we are in some of the moisture conditions, but they're still rolling through as very much a break-even type of proposition. So guys trying to decide, it's dry, bone dry, should I be spraying? We're still finding that in the law of averages, these things are still paying for themselves even in those dry scenarios. However, the head timing products like Folicare and Prosero at that T3, even in some of those drier scenarios, are still providing that positive return on investment for these guys. However, when we make the jump into, you know, what we would call a normal moisture year here in the center, or even a higher moisture year over on the other side, that's, again, we get more moisture showing up, more of an environment that's conducive for disease manifesting itself in the plant, and obviously we're going to see more of a response with regards to the fungicides at that point. If you dive down a little bit further into the numbers, you know, you can look, you can see the numbers increase from the dry to the normal to the excess moisture. And the big jump that we see is going from the dry scenario to the moisture. We tend to see, that's where we see the biggest jump in fungicide performance. But when we start looking at, say, like a normal moisture to a high moisture scenario, there is a little bit of a bump, but not as much as what we're seeing moving from the dry to the normal. So Cole's notes at the end of the day, when I look at this, is if a guy thinks that he's going to be ending up at kind of a normal moisture area, or normal moisture condition for his area for that year, and as long as he can kind of get into this stage, then we're laughing.